Hello and welcome to the Swope Health Lunch and Learn series. We have our second speaker for this month, and I'm honored to have Bob Kendrick, who is the president and CEO of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And Bob has been all over TV these last couple of weeks because he's just doing a lot in the community. And we recently saw Buck O'Neil was able to get into the Hall of Fame, and so that is a big win for the Negro Leagues. For our local hometown hero. So I want to welcome Bob Kendricks. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, Devon, it is my pleasure. Hello, good afternoon to all of my friends, particularly over at Swope Health. We are certainly very proud of our relationship and partnership with Swope. And of course, we got to celebrate that with the partnership, of course, alongside our friends at the Kansas City Monarchs. And what an honor it is for me anytime that I get an opportunity to talk about the history of the Negro Leagues and what this history represents both on and off the field. And of course, some of you may be aware that our friends over at the Kansas City Royals just last week announced that they are making the museum free of charge to any and everyone who wants to visit during the month of February as part of their tribute to Black History Month and their support of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So if you haven't been to the museum, the month of February is a great time to do so. If you have been to the museum, come back, bring your families. It is absolutely free. You don't need a coupon. You don't need anything but a will and a desire to walk through those doors and experience. And let me say this, I'll preface this by saying, I'm biased. Experience what I believe to be the best baseball history museum anywhere in the world, and it's right here in our backyard at historic 18th and Vine. And I say that with no disrespect to my friends in Cooperstown, New York, where they have that hollow hall known as the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which is a wonderful edifice and a tribute to the game of baseball, if you like stuff. They've got stuff galore. But here in Kansas City at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, it ain't about the stuff. It is about a story, a powerful, compelling, inspirational story that had been lost to time. It is not in the pages of American history books. So countless generations of us have gone through our own formal educations without knowing one of the most significant chapters, not just in baseball history, but in American history. And some of you may also be aware that just last week, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum was added to the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. And that is a tremendous feather in the cap of this museum, because what it does is it kind of helps validate what we've known all along, is that this story is far bigger than baseball. You could never reduce this story to just being about baseball. This story is about the importance of economic empowerment. This story is about leadership, and this story is ultimately about the social advancement of this country as Jackie Robinson is handpicked from the great Kansas City Monarchs to break Major League Baseball's 6-decade-long self-imposed color barrier. And we make the bold assertion that Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement, it was the beginning of the civil rights movement. You see, this is 1947. This is well before those more noted civil rights occurrences. So this is before Brown versus the Board of Education. This is before Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as my friend Buck O'Neil would so eloquently say, was merely a sophomore at Morehouse College when Jackie signed his contract to play in the Dodgers organization. Our very own President Truman would not integrate the armed forces until a year after Jackie. So for all intents and purposes, this is what started the ball of social progress rolling in our country. And folks, that story comes to life beautifully here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So yes, you're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever play this game. But by the time you walk away from this experience, you walk away with a much deeper, richer appreciation for just how great this country really is. Because I tell my guests all the time, the story of the Negro Leagues could have only happened in America. So yes, it is anchored against the ugliness of American segregation, a horrible chapter in this country's history. But you see, what emerged out of segregation was this amazing story of triumph and conquest. And y'all, it's all based on one small, simple principle. You won't let me play with you in the major leagues, then I'll create my own league. And when you stop to think about that, that is the American way. And so while America was trying to prevent them from sharing in the joys of her so-called national pastime, it was indeed the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. So this is not a woe is mine kind of story. These athletes never cried about the social injustice. They went out and did something about it. And for me, this story embodies the American spirit, unlike any story in the annals of American history. Again, it's about everything that this country prides itself in being, because it is about pride. It's about passion. It's about perseverance. It is about the refusal to accept the notion that you're unfit to do anything, so I'll show you. And so what's not to love about this story? But we need more folks at home to get just as excited about this museum as the people who are coming from around the globe to experience it. And the month of February is a pretty doggone good time to do it because it's all on the Royals. Your admission has already been paid for. So please share this with your friends, your families, loved ones, and let them know that the opportunity for them to experience this great museum is free of charge the entire month of February. A little bit about the museum. We started this project in a little one-room office in 1990. Y'all, it was about a fraction of the size of my office. And it had a conference room table and guys like the late, great Buck O'Neil and other local Negro Leaguers who were still with us at that time. Sad to say, all of those guys who were part of the founding members of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, those former players are all gone, including Buck. And they literally took turns paying the monthly rent to keep that little office open. And of course, with it, our hopes and dreams of one day building a facility that would not only again pay rightful tribute to one of the great chapters in baseball history, but one of the greatest chapters in American history. That is how we got started. So we are as grassroots an institution as you will ever meet. No one gave the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum any chance of succeeding because we were building it here at historic 18th and Vine. And at the time that we came along, there was nothing at 18th and Vine. 18th and Vine had essentially been left to die. It was abandoned. And here comes this little fledgling museum talking about we're going to build a museum here. And as you all can well imagine, our most ardent supporters thought we were crazy. Heck, we thought we were crazy. But thanks to really the leadership of Buck O'Neil, who said, this is where we will build this museum. The origins of this story that we preserve and celebrate began right here in Kansas City. And in doing so, we won't only build this museum, we will help resurrect historic 18th and Vine. That was in 1990. Here we are now, 32 years later, and we haven't looked back. And we're recognized now as America's national Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. But just as importantly, people are living, working, and playing at 18th and Vine again. And to be quite frankly, y'all, I don't know if that would have happened had this museum decided not to anchor here in 1990. And in essence, we've embodied the spirit of the Negro League. Because you see, wherever you had successful Black baseball, you had thriving Black economies. So we felt like we not only had, well, we had a historical responsibility and a social responsibility to be right where we are. And we're very proud of the fact that we've been able to keep this museum afloat in existence in a place that nobody wanted us to be. And that, to me, is very much a part of our DNA. We did exactly what we were supposed to do. And so I've got a series of slides. We won't have time to run through them all, but I wanted to, for those of you who maybe have been here, you might recall there's this wonderful passage when you walk into the gallery of the museum. It's taken from the Roman Catholic Bible, Ecclesiastes, and it simply says, "My son, if you aspire to be a servant of the Lord, Prepare yourself for testing, set a straight course and keep to it, and do not be dismayed in the face of adversity. Well, that was Negro Leagues baseball in a nutshell. These athletes loved the game of baseball so much that they were willing to endure whatever social adversity confronted them as they traveled the highways and byways of this country just to play baseball. Their passion would not only change our sport, but it would change our country. And really, that's the story that we bring to the forefront. It's an incredible story. It really is, because what we focus on is triumph over adversity. A lot of folks want to point to just the adversity, but we don't look at it from that standpoint. That's why I say there's nothing sad or somber about this story. It is a celebration, but it is the celebration of the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail. And when we talk about persevering and prevail, I wanted to show this slide in particular because this is from February of 2020, almost a year from the day that we're now having this conversation. And many of you may be aware that 2020 marked the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Negro Leagues. And certainly from our purview, the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues is one of the most significant things that happened, not in just baseball, but in American history. And of course, the Negro Leagues were formed in the Paseo YMCA, right here around the corner from my office, here in the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District, formed on February 13, 1920. So on February 13, 2020, we go back into the Paseo YMCA to commemorate this milestone occasion. And Deron, as you can see from this slide, we've got an all-star roster of distinguished guests with us. Yeah, you see me standing there, and I guess facing the screen to my left is the commissioner of Major League Baseball, Rob Manfred, the chief operating officer of Major League Baseball Player Associations in the back, standing behind actress Judy Pace. That's Xavier James. To my right, as we look at the screen, the Honorable Mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, my dear friend, 8-time Gold Glove winner, Royal Hall of Famer, now Jackson County Executive, Frank White, former Missouri State Senator Kiki Curls, former City Councilman Jermaine Reed, and in the back of the, standing next to Senator Curl, former Senator Curl, that's Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe was in attendance, and of course, John Sherman, the owner of our Kansas City Royals. So we had an all-star delegation of distinguished guests join me in the exact same space 100 years from the date that Ruth Foster signed these leagues into existence. Many of you may recall Major League Baseball and the Players Association announced a joint $1 million contribution. And anybody who knows me, anytime there's a check involved, I'm always smiling. So you can see why I'm smiling in that picture. And then we rolled out our plans for a year-long celebration, which was going to include a National Day of Recognition, the first ever National Day of Recognition where all 30 Major League teams on one given day were going to honor the Negro Leagues. We were going to do an in-stadium salute to the Negro Leagues and a tip of the cap with players and fans in stadium. Well, as you all will know, in less than 30 days later, everything came to a screeching halt, just like that. Right. A doggone coronavirus. Man, I still don't know what a coronavirus is. All I know is that it wreaked havoc. And all of these wonderful plans that we had in store were falling by the wayside. And I tell people all the time, as a steward of this story, you know that you are not allowed to wallow in self-pity. That would be doing a complete disservice to those who call the Negro Leagues home. But y'all, if I tell you anything other than the fact that I was wallowing, I'd be lying to you. There was some wallowing going on because this anniversary milestone meant a great deal to this museum. Not only was there this year-long celebration, but this was going to be the springboard to a significant fundraising effort so that we could now position the museum for long-term sustainability. I'm seeing all of this fly right out of the window and you had no control over it. And so we shuttered our operations on March 14th and didn't reopen until June 16th. Well, the National Day of Recognition was supposed to take place on June 26th. And so when we reopened, it was very clear that there wasn't going to be a National Day of Recognition because by that time, we didn't even know if Major League Baseball was coming back. The league and the Players Association were in very contentious negotiations, not about whether or not they're going to play, if or when they were going to play was the big question. But we knew it wasn't going to be June 26th. And so that's when I came up with the idea to do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro League. So I reached out to my good friend Joe Posnanski, my brother from another mother. We're not blood brothers, but man, we are as thick as brothers. And every time I have a bad idea, y'all, I vet it with Joe. So I called Joe and said, Joe, I got this crazy idea to see if we can't do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro Leagues. I'm waiting for him to tell me, Bob, that's crazy. We don't have enough time to pull that off. This event is going to take place on June 26th. We don't have enough time to pull this off. He didn't say that. He thought it was a great idea. He reached out to his business partner, a tremendous communication strategist out of DC by the name of Dan McGinn. We vetted it with Dan. He thought it was a great idea. And the three of us went to work. And folks, on June 27th of 2020, we rolled out this campaign and we rolled it out with 4 US presidents tipping their cap to the Negro Leagues. President Obama, President George W. Bush, President Clinton, President Jimmy Carter, transcending athletes like Michael Jordan, Billie Jean King, Magic Johnson, entertainers like Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien. But when we literally went into outer space and got a tip of the cap from astronaut Chris Cassidy, who was aboard the International Space Station, I knew then that we had done something that was pretty doggone special. And this campaign went viral. And with it, our fortunes started to change. We went from this spirit of doom and gloom to now renewed hope and optimism. But you know what? It mirrors the resilient spirit of the Negro Leagues. We had to summon that. Now, I ain't lying, we had to dig deep to go get it, but somehow or another, we found it. And all of a sudden, our fortunes started to change. And by the time we got through that fiscal year, which our fiscal year runs July 1st to June 30th, we'd had one of the best years in recent museum history. We've been able to maintain that tremendous momentum. You know, Deron talked about my friend Buck O'Neil going into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And I'm gonna tell y'all, I'm not even a drinker. I'm not even a drinker at all. And I told my staff that if Buck got in, I was gonna drink a glass of champagne. None of them believed it, but there's the proof. And it was indeed champagne. There's not water in there. That's not Sprite. It was champagne. And let me tell you, it was the sweetest champagne I've ever tasted because Buck O'Neil deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. He had missed 15 years prior by one single vote. And as you probably know, he passed away later on that year in 2006. And that has remained with me since that time. And here we now had the opportunity to celebrate because in 2006, there were many tears, but they were tears of anguish. On December 5th of 2021, there were more tears, but they were tears of joy, tears of elation, because our guy had finally taken his rightful place in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And we couldn't be more proud. And while we wish he was here to celebrate with us, Deron, you know, we want a high five, we want a hug, we want a chest bump with our guy. We won't get to do that, but it does not diminish the impact and it doesn't diminish his accomplishments. And it certainly creates a tremendous opportunity for his museum to capitalize on this once in a lifetime opportunity. So we're already planning a KC to Cooperstown caravan, and we'll come back home and celebrate. Mark your calendars for November 12th of this year for the big Buck O'Neil Hall of Fame celebration. And we couldn't be more excited about this and some of the other things. There you see the US Mint commemorative coins that just went on sale in January. Guys, buy those coins because if we sell all of those coins, and I know Congressman Cleaver is going to be your next speaker as part of this series, and he was so vitally important in helping us leverage the opportunity to get these coins. They're not easy to get. You've got to get 3/4 of Congress to sign off on it. And as you all well know, and Deron, you will know as well as anyone, it ain't a whole lot of bipartisanship going on in DC these days. And so to get 3/4 of Congress to sign off on this legislation, I ain't gonna say it was virtually impossible, but it damn near was. And thanks to the leadership of Congressman Cleaver, Republican Congressman Steve Stivers, Republican Senator Roy Blunt, Republican Senator Tim Kaine, they led this effort that now has the U.S. Mint create the first ever U.S. Mint commemorative coins honoring the Negro Leagues. And if we can sell through these coins, we can raise $6 million for this museum. So I hope you will consider going to the U.S. Mint website, buying these coins, giving them to your family, give them to your kids. These are keepsakes. You know, you make an investment in the museum, but this is something that will only grow in value over time. And so I'm going to pause my PowerPoint. I'm going to set it up so Deron and I can talk a little bit, whatever he wants to ask me. And if I don't know, I'll lie and act like I do. And so we'll move into a conversation. I know he wants to leave time for some of you to have questions, if you do have questions. But we'll talk a little bit more about the formation of the Negro Leagues and anything else that Deron wants to talk about. All right, Mr. McGee, what you got?
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. If you're just joining in today, we're listening to Bob Kendrick, President and CEO of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And Bob, it was a great presentation. You have really done a lot of good work at the museum, and I tip my cap off to you for the work that you're doing and have done. And I know you are working. You're a man on the move, constantly having more work to do. A couple of questions I did want to follow up with you on. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you kind of touched on this, about the museum and it's starting in this one room, right?
Yeah.
Give me a little bit more about that story, because I didn't know that. So where was this one room at, and how did you get to where you are now?
Right across the street inside the historic Lincoln Building.
Okay.
Right across the street inside the historic Lincoln Building. It was an idea that came about from the late, great Horace Peterson.
Okay.
And Horace Peterson, of course, ran the Black Archives of Mid-America. And Horace approached Buck O'Neill about the idea then of doing a Negro Leagues Hall of Fame. And Buck said, no, Horace, we don't need a separate Hall of Fame. Buck felt very passionate about the fact that if you were good enough as a baseball player, you should be enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And that it was far more important for us to preserve, celebrate, illuminate than it was to create a pseudo Hall of Fame when you knew from the onset that you had a finite number of people that you could put into your Hall of Fame. So Horace asked, well, Buck, what would you suggest? Buck said a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And that's when we started down that path of the guys taking turns paying the rent in that little office on the 3rd floor of the Lincoln Building. I'll never forget, I got involved with the museum as a volunteer in 1993. Who knew? I certainly didn't. I had no idea, y'all, that I was walking into my passion. You know, at that time, I was a baseball fan who really did not know very much about the Negro Leagues. I knew the names Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell. These are transcending names. Most baseball fans have at least heard those names. Now, you may not know how great they were, but you likely heard those names. But I had no idea about the breadth, the depth, the scope, the magnitude of which this history represented both on and off the field. And I became engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could. And y'all, I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everyone else to feel the same way that I felt. And then I started, Deron, to meet the players. And the more I met the players, the deeper I fell in love with this story, because their spirits were tremendous. I think all of you would agree with me. Had they been bitter about the things that transpired in their lives as they were trying to play baseball in this country, I think every one of us would have said you had every right to be bitter. But to a player I ever met, not one of them harbored any bitterness or expressed any ill will toward anyone who may have attempted to perpetrate something against them as they were trying to play baseball in this country. And I found that to be an incredible, endearing spirit. And so now I am enamored with this. And so I had no idea when I was volunteering. I was working at the Kansas Star. And the first time I walked into the museum, I really didn't even know that there was this museum here until I drew the assignment to promote the museum's first ever traveling exhibition. And so I walked into the little office, and Deron, I don't know if you remember the late great Don Motley. Don Motley was the first executive director. And I walked in and I said, I'm looking for Mr. Motley and I'm looking for the Negro League Baseball Museum. He said, son, you're standing in it. And it was just this office with some pictures on the wall and boxes on the floor. And so I quickly understood, the challenge that we had, but you had, again, a dedicated few who were determined that this story deserved to stand the test of time. And so that's how it got going. Like I said, I started as a volunteer. I would become the museum's first director of marketing in 1998, left my corporate job and took a leap of faith to become the museum's first director of marketing. I served in that role up until 2010, where I left as vice president of marketing. And I went to go run another organization for all of 13 months. And 13 months later, here I come back being introduced in 2011 as the museum's new president. And I tell you what, I've been running ever since. But man, what an amazing journey it has been for me to go from being a volunteer to now trying to lead this great organization.
So, you touched on this earlier presentation, the game of baseball itself is very expensive, as you well know. To have a team, it costs a lot of money. And some people call baseball the teams of the have and the have-nots because they don't have salary caps. And so my question is to you is how did the Negro Leagues really form? Did they, with the ownerships and the funding and the financing of the traveling of the teams, because it's very expensive to have a team?
Yeah, no, you had all of these Black businessmen who invested in Black baseball. So when Rube Foster formed the Negro Leagues here in Kansas City in 1920, he literally led a contingent of 8 independent Black baseball team owners. So we've been playing baseball for a long time. Matter of fact, folks, there is evidence of us playing baseball even as enslaved people. So it was not new. It wasn't a new phenomena for Black folks to play baseball. What it didn't have was an organized structure. It was just barnstorming. It was too haphazard. So teams were folding, emerging, folding. Players were jumping from team to team. And so with the urgence of the Black press, Rube Foster convened that meeting here in Kansas City on February 13, 1920, with those 8 independent Black baseball team owners to give Black baseball what it sorely needed, an organized structure. And when they walked away from that meeting, they had walked away forming the Negro National League, the first successful organized Black baseball league. One of those original 8 franchises, our very own Kansas City Monarchs, one of the greatest baseball franchises, not in Black baseball history, but in baseball history. Folks, we're talking 1 losing season in their almost 40-year existence in the Negro Leagues. They sent more players to the major leagues than any other Negro League franchise. They were a model organization. There are those who will say that the Kansas City Monarchs were the New York Yankees of the Negro Leagues. There are others who will say that the New York Yankees were the Kansas City Monarchs of the major leagues. They were that good. And with no disrespect to my friends at the Kansas City Royals, who I love dearly, the Kansas City Monarchs are still the greatest baseball franchise our city has ever seen. So many people still have great recollection of having seen the Monarchs play. And Deron, opening day for the Kansas City Monarchs, there would be a marching band that would start right here at 18th and Vine. The stadium, as many of you may recall, was at 22nd and Brooklyn, right up the hill from Arthur Bryant. Marching band would start here at 18th and Vine, and behind them, 17,000 plus, standing room only to go see the great Kansas City Monarchs. And you were going to see a show. And so those Black businessmen are really the ones who financed Black baseball, because you're right. And I tell people all the time, the only thing that separates the Negro Leagues from the major leagues was funding. The
Right.
major leagues had more money. They had more money. But from a talent standpoint, the Negro Leagues wouldn't take a back seat to any league. Yeah, and so the major leagues had their own stadiums. And there would later be several Negro League teams that would build their own stadium. But really, all the major league owners had their own stadiums or access to stadiums that they could have full control over. But you know what? That's one of the reasons why it took so long to integrate the game, because Negro Leagues were renting the stadiums from those major league teams. And the major league teams were making money off the Negro Leagues. Yeah. And so they were in no hurry to see integration, because now if you kill the Negro Leagues, you're going to take a source of revenue away from me. We were able to acquire a set of letters a few years ago, a letter, I should say, about a 4-page letter that was written by a guy named Larry MacPhail. Larry MacPhail was the managing partner of the New York Yankees. The letter was written in 1945. And MacPhail, there was a lot of pressure being put on baseball to examine his hiring practices, to open his door to allow Black and brown players in. Well, the Yankees were totally resistant against this. And so MacPhail writes a letter to Mayor LaGuardia, the same guy that the airport in New York is named for. And in this letter, he basically lines out why integration is a bad idea. And so he'd say something like, and actually he'd say something that really had validity to it, but he'd add some kind of absurd extra to it. So for instance, he'd say, well, if we sign Black players, we will put the Negro Leagues out of business. Absolutely right. But then in the next verse, he said, well, you know, they lack the faculties to play in our league. Now, I don't know when you had to become a Rhodes Scholar to play in the major leagues, but that was the perception, that we weren't smart enough to play in the major leagues. But then he finally gets to the real crux of the matter. Guys, in 1945, the New York Yankees netted over $100,000 off the Negro Leagues. Now, $100,000 is a lot of money today. $100,000 in 1945, that was a whole lot of money, and they didn't have to do much to get that money. All they had to do was sign on the dotted line. Needless to say, they were in no hurry for integration. I tell my guests all the time, anytime they say it ain't about the money,
it's about the
it's
money.
always about the money.
Now you got me asking, how much was a ticket in the Negro Leagues baseball in 1945?
It varied. It varied somewhere in that range between $1, $1.50, right in that range. But, it changed from era to era. I give you a good case and example. When Buck O'Neil joined the Kansas City Monarchs in 1938, he said he came here, he said he was making $100 a month salary and $1 a day meal money. Now, as you guys could well imagine, when the kids hear $1, they're wondering, what in the world could you buy for $1? Well, in 1938, we're still in the midst of the Great Depression. And so Buck stayed at the Street Hotel. The Street Hotel was the Black-owned hotel right down on the corner of 18th and Paseo here in the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District, right where Soiree's restaurant is today. Buck says, Bob, I could walk downstairs, I could have ham and eggs and a cup of coffee for breakfast. Said he skipped lunch, he only ate 2 meals a day, could have a Kansas City strip steak dinner with all the fixings plus dessert. At that time, he smoked. Said he could buy a package of Camel cigarettes, could walk across the street to the Gym Theater and see the matinee and still have 15 cents to play with out of that $1. So, the value of the $1 was pretty strong back then.
Well, and Bob, it's really funny that you mentioned this, because you talked about the New York Yankees being sued for hiring practices, and it triggered in my mind, and you said that was in 1945.
That's 45.
And it triggered in my mind, we're still having these same conversations today about hiring practices in the NFL. And so with the issue around Black coaches being hired. And so it's really interesting that, 60 years later, we're still talking about integration on the coaching and the professional side, not so much on the player side in the NFL and in the Major League Baseball itself. That is interesting. We're still having those same conversations.
No,
I mean, in terms of the office staff.
Yeah, no, you're right. I again, you'll hear me mention Buck because Buck was one of my best friends. He was my mentor, my confidant. And some of you may be aware that Buck O'Neil broke the color barrier as the first Black coach in Major League Baseball history. But think about this. That was 15 years after Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier. This is 1962, when Buck becomes the first Black coach in Major League Baseball history. He says, I was proud of being that person. And it meant better living conditions, maybe a little bit more money. But as he would also say, Deron, I couldn't stick out my chest because I was the first Black coach, because I knew all of these other great Black baseball minds who were more than capable of waving a guy home. So what you touched on is still very much the case. The field was looked at for integration, but not the hierarchy of baseball. You know, we ran an entire baseball league. It was predominantly ran by Black business people. And then you not only, so you had Black ownership, you had Black managers, you had Black coaches, you had Black team physicians and traveling secretaries. We fulfilled every role that you could fill in the game of baseball. But when integration occurred, it was primarily the field that was looked at. Those other positions were never afforded to those great Black minds who could have fulfilled those roles. And we're still seeing that in professional sports, not just baseball, but and now we know the NFL and the NBA is probably a little bit more progressive than the other leagues, but we still got a lot of work to do. And so when Coach Flores stepped out last week and decided to sue the NFL, I kind of exhaled and said to myself, are we witnessing another Curt Flood moment? And I don't know if you all know the story of Curt Flood, but Curt Flood was a tremendous ball player, outfielder for the St. Louis Cardinals, and and the Cardinals wanted to trade him in 1968, after the 1968 season, to the Philadelphia Phillies. No one wanted to go to Philly, particularly if you're Black. Philly was terrible. And Curt Flood decided that he would refuse the trade and that he would ultimately fight baseball's antitrust rule and reserve clause. And he ultimately takes his case to the Supreme Court, where he narrowly lost a decision there with the Supreme Court. But Curt Flood is now responsible for what we now know as free agency in not only baseball, in professional sports. But Curt Flood, y'all, died penniless. He lost everything. Curt Flood in 1968 was making $100,000 a year. So we're not talking about just some average Joe baseball player. Curt Flood was a star. And he lost everything because of the stance that he took. And I tell people all the time, if you walk in your conviction, chances are you're going to walk alone. And so when Coach Flores stepped out and made this bold move to sue the NFL, I'm saying to myself, are we watching another Curt Flood episode? Now, I don't think it will be to the level of severity for Coach Flores. He's made a great living in the sport, and there will be other opportunities that will open up for him. But I'm not sure he'll ever coach in the NFL again. And that would be a travesty if that does indeed happen. So it remains to be seen. But you know, these things are so eerily similar, Deron. And you know, you see these parallels between what was taking place in the Negro Leagues years before and to the point where we're still seeing things kind of manifest themselves to this very day.
Now, I do want to follow up with you, Bob. You know, you are the magic man when it comes to cutting a deal, I hear. Talk to me and walk us through the process in which the T-Bones became the Kansas City Monarchs.
Yeah, I tell you, man, it was one that honestly surprised me. I wish I could tell y'all that this was my brilliant idea. And I could, but I'd be lying to you. Now, 20 years from now, I might lie and swear it was my idea, but it really wasn't. Mark Brandmeier, who I know you've gotten to know now, Mark Brandmeier approached me, oh God, it must have been late 2020. And I didn't even know that Mark had bought the then former T-Bones because they were still the T-Bones at that time. And of course, the pandemic killed their season. So he had a little time on his hand and he reached out to me and he wanted to meet. I really didn't know what he wanted to meet about, but I was like, okay, cool, let's meet. And he comes in, and that's when he springs it on me. What do you think about us rebranding the T-Bones as the Kansas City Monarchs? So, I didn't have a whole lot of time to think about this or process it. And initially, I'll be honest, I wasn't enamored with the idea because the Monarchs is our flagship brand. That's our baby. And again, what the Monarchs legacy represents in this community is so important. And I'm like, I don't know if we want to attach this to a minor league team that may or may not make it. But then I got to know Mark, and myself, along with our board of directors, were privy to his business plan. And the more I got to know Mark and talk to Mark and his ownership group, the more sense this started to make. Because number one, as a museum, cultural institution, we're always challenging ourselves of how do we create relevancy. So yes, the Monarchs is this, this pristine, historic brand. But how do I make it relevant to what's happening in the lives of young people today? To me, that's the challenge for any history museum, and particularly a cultural institution like ours. And so you started to think about relevancy. Every time those young players put on those Monarch pinstripes, y'all, they channeling the spirit of Satchel Paige and Buck O'Neil, Hilton Smith, Willard Brown, all those legendary stars of the Monarchs of past. And then they were going to be taking this message to all those other towns in which they play baseball in. So there's that aspect of it. And then alongside the pure business side of this, because understand, this is not a charitable kind of undertaking. This is a business partnership. And it represents, the entrepreneurial spirit that drove the Negro Leagues. So we're talking about a partnership that could yield perpetual revenue for this museum for the next 20 years if this club is successful. And there wasn't a whole lot to risk from a financial standpoint, just simply more to gain. And so when you put all of that together, it just made sense that we rebrand this team as the Kansas City Monarchs, or as we say, a reign was reborn. Now, the thing that I had told Mark and his team, I was like, look, if you're going to be the Kansas City Monarchs, you have to win. You've got to win. You can't go out there and lose and be the Monarchs. Oh, I'm taking the name back. And as fate would have it, they win the championship in their inaugural season, keeping alive the winning spirit of the Kansas City Monarchs. But in all sincerity, it's been a wonderful partnership. We think that we've only scratched the surface in terms of what this partnership can yield, but it's been a win-win for both sides. That rebranding was really a stroke of genius. And to see so much Monarch gear walking around now. And keep in mind, we get a percentage of all tickets sold, of all merchandise sold, and all food and beverage sold as part of this partnership proposition that we've entered in with now the Kansas City Monarchs. So I say that to say, I hope that you all will support this club this season. It's a great brand of baseball. These kids are playing their hearts out. A lot of these kids are still hopeful for getting to the major leagues. And we couldn't be more excited, Ron, over how this has transpired. And like I said, I think the future is tremendously bright for not only the Monarchs, but the museum in conjunction with this partnership.
Well, it was a great business decision. It doesn't matter where you go. Dick's Sporting Goods, Rally House, there are Monarchs, Negro Leagues, Baseball Museum gear, and all of the major franchising stores now. And so I think that was a great move. And we are coming close to the hour, Bob, but I did want to follow up with you. As you all know, you already know, we are the health sponsor for the Kansas City Monarchs now. So that is a partnership that we're enjoying now. But I also wanted to ask from the chat, someone asked, who was the longest running franchise in the Negro League history?
Kansas City Monarchs.
It was the Kansas City Monarchs. Okay.
Our very own Kansas City Monarchs, longer running franchise. There were a couple of others that were in the vicinity, the Homestead Grays, Chicago American Giants, but the Monarchs were there from the beginning all the way to the bittersweet end of the Negro Leagues. Mm-hmm. And they represented well. Now, after about 1956, they left Kansas City. Yeah, they were bought by a guy named Ted Raspberry, and Ted moved the team to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And, but the name was so strong that he just always kept the name the Kansas City Monarchs. And they never played again in Kansas City after that. Yeah, but they are the longest running Negro League franchise.
Wow. And Bob, wrapping up, I did want to ask you, so tell the viewers who are listening, what is the future of the Negro League Museum in the next 10 years? What can we expect? What is your vision for the Negro League Museum over the next 10 years?
I think it's tremendously bright. I think you guys are going to hopefully continue to be proud of the things that we are doing. I was telling someone the other day, we've had a great year already, and it's just February the 10th. You mentioned all the media attention that we've been getting, and we think we just scratched the surface. We just announced this week a major partnership with the retailer Lids. And for those of you who've gone into Lids to buy caps and other things, they've got stores, I think over 500 plus stores across the US, and a new Negro Leagues line that is coming out exclusive to Lids at the end of the month on February 28th. We think this thing is going to be huge for the museum. But as we look toward the future, the next big thing for us is to complete the Buck O'Neil Education and Research Center. And of course, that is going to be built at the site of the Purcell YMCA. So essentially, guys, we are basically going back in to save that historic landmark and create an education and research center in memory of the late, great Buck O'Neil. And in essence, go full circle right back to the very building that gave birth to the story that we're now charged with preserving. But we have to grow. We're in growth mode now. And we've run out of space here at the museum that 18th and Vine. So we bought, well, actually the building was donated by the late, great philanthropist Landon Rowland to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And thanks to the diligence and tireless work of my friend, the barbecue baron, Ollie Gates, who has been so committed to this project so that his friend will be remembered for how important education was to Buck O'Neil. We're now going back in. We had done some tremendous work in the building. Some of you may recall that someone went in and very heinously tried to destroy the project, cut a mainline water pipe, flooded it, caused well over $500,000 in damages, knocked the wind completely out of my sails. I ain't lying. And so we're regrouping from that now. We're about to go back into the buildings, start to repair those areas that were damaged. We hope to have that work done by later this year, and then continue the process of completely renovating that old historic landmark to expand our operations. And that is certainly front and center for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. But it's also equally important that we now move aggressively to create an endowment for this museum. And that's the one thing that you'll see with a lot of cultural institutions, particularly of our size. They never have the money that is necessary for them to operate in perpetuity. We don't want that to be the case for this museum. So, as I get ready to wind things down, I don't know how much longer, I'm going to do this or how much longer they'll want me to do this, but it is important that we set the foundation for long-term sustainable growth for this organization. And so we're going to hopefully embark here soon on a significant fundraising campaign so that this museum will be able to operate into perpetuity. And so those things are imminent for our museum. But the building of the Buck O'Neil Center, I think, is going to be a major boost to all of our efforts and the continued growth of this museum.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you for being with us in this hour here as our second speaker for the Swope Health Black History Lunch and Learn series. And it's also important to note to our viewers that Bob is so modest, he failed to mention that he has a new Sirius XM radio show called Black Diamonds. So I encourage you all to listen to that, Black Diamonds on Sirius XM radio. And so, Bob, I think you're almost like, a Baptist minister. You're gonna be there for life. You're never gonna retire. So you're there forever. So, Bob, thank you for all the hard work that you're doing for the city, for the state, for the nation, and preserving the memory of the Negro Leagues and all the work that you're doing. Any final thoughts, sir?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to be here with an institution, because Swope is an institution in our community, and to see the great work that you all are doing to make healthcare affordable, but still quality for all of our citizens. And that is something that is so important. It is near and dear to all of us here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We're thrilled to have that alignment with Swope along with the Kansas City Monarchs. And we look forward to doing some amazing things collaboratively through this partnership as well. So again, thank you all so much for the opportunity to just talk a little bit about the history of the Negro Leagues and the work of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I hope to see you all here during the month of February and beyond, but particularly during the month of February. And I'll make sure, Ron, that I share the flyer that you can maybe share with the folks there as well, reminding them that the museum is completely free the entire month of February. So please come out
And send us information on how to get those coins too. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely, I will.
That would be great. And if you've got Sirius XM radio, tune in to
Check it
Black
out.
Diamonds with
Black
you.
Diamonds, the new season will start in April, but you can go back and check out. We did over 26 episodes last year, and they let me have a little bit of a hiatus because I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I got into the world of podcasting. But you know, we were very fortunate around the Black Diamonds was named the National Sports Podcast of the Year by Adweek. And man, I'm telling you, I was surprised because again, I had no idea what the heck I was doing. They just said, "Hey, you're a good storyteller. We want you to tell stories." And I said, "Okay." And we started telling stories, and people really took to this history and these stories. So yeah, please, it'll be back in April, but by all means, check it out.
Well, Bob, I have one favor to ask. Since I had you on our show, you got to have me on your show, Black Diamonds, when you cover the World Series. So I'll come.
All right, you got a deal.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you so much.
Bye, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you all for joining.